Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a pile of sources here, articles, some research, our notes, and, well, our goal is pretty simple. Unpack the key insights, make the complex stuff clear and understandable for you.
Yeah, think of it like your fast track to getting up to speed. We pull out the really important bits, maybe some surprising connections you hadn't thought of.
So today we're really digging into the current cybersecurity scene. Our sources cover quite a range, actually. We've got specific tech vulnerabilities, things in mobile phones, infrastructure, but also, broader trends in attack methods and how defenses are, well, trying to cope.
It's definitely moving fast out there, and
Yeah.
understanding what's really going on kind of beneath the headlines is so important. Let's see what these sources tell us.
Okay, kicking things off, this first source looks at a new cryptojacking campaign.
Right, cryptojacking. And just quickly, for anyone maybe less familiar, it's basically when someone uses your computer's processing power, could be a server, your laptop, whatever, to mine cryptocurrency for themselves, secretly, without asking. They're essentially stealing your resources.
Got it. And the sources actually put a name to this one. JINX0132. Wiz, the security firm, is cracking it.
Exactly. And what's really noticeable about JNX 0132 is who they're targeting.
Hmm.
These publicly accessible DevOps web servers. Tools that companies use to build and deploy software, things like Docker, Gitea, HashiCorp Console, Nomad. Maybe not things you use directly, but critical behind-the-scenes stuff.
Okay, so how are they managing to break into these systems? Are we talking about like super sophisticated attacks,
Yeah.
brand new vulnerabilities nobody knew about?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting, according to the sources. They're not really using 0 days or inventing fancy new attack tools. This campaign, it's mostly exploiting known misconfigurations, things set up incorrectly. And the tools they use, just standard utilities you can find openly on places like GitHub.
Oh, so hold on. Attackers are having success just by looking for common setup mistakes on these powerful systems and using like widely available scripts. That feels less like high-tech hacking and more like just checking for unlocked doors on a huge scale.
That's a great way to put it. It really tells us that even with all the advanced threats out there, basic security hygiene, just getting the fundamentals right, is still a massive area of weakness. The big takeaway here seems to be that attackers are finding plenty of success going after the easy targets, the misconfigurations. It just hammers home how vital it is to secure all your infrastructure, maybe even the bits you think are internal facing, and patch those known issues, fix those setup errors.
That's quite a reminder, isn't it? The basics are still absolutely critical. Okay, let's pivot a bit. From servers to something, well, much closer to home for most people, our mobile phones. We've got sources pointing out vulnerabilities there, too.
Yes, these next sources talk about security flaws found in pre-installed Android apps. So importantly, these aren't apps you chose to download. These are the ones that came loaded on the phone when you bought it, often ones you can't even uninstall easily. The examples mentioned are specific phones from Ulefone and Kruger Mats.
Pre-installed apps. They feel like they should be safe, right?
Yeah.
Part of the system.
Yeah.
So what was the actual problem, the vulnerability?
The core issue, as the sources describe it, was specific flaws within some of these preloaded apps. One example given is an app called com.pry.factory test on certain Ulefone models. Now, what makes this really concerning is that these flaws could potentially be triggered or exploited by any other app you might install later.
Hold on. So an app I download myself, maybe something that seems totally harmless from the App Store, could potentially use a weakness in an app that the manufacturer put on the phone. That sounds like a supply chain risk almost.
It definitely points to that supply chain aspect, yeah. And the sources mention some pretty nasty potential consequences if an exploit worked. A malicious app could possibly trigger a full factory reset, wipe all your data, or even encrypt your other applications, basically holding them hostage. This particular set of flaws got the identifier CVE 2024-13915, and it has a CVSS score of 6.9.
Right, CVE for the vulnerability name, CVSS for the severity score. Thanks. 6.9, that's what, moderate to high severity. And wiping data or locking apps sounds pretty disruptive. It really does make you think, what are the unique risks with these apps that are baked in, often unremovable, sitting deeper in the phone system?
It's certainly a tricky area because as a user, you have so little control over them compared to apps you install yourself.
Okay, sticking with mobile for a moment longer. Another source mentions Qualcomm fixing 0 days.
Right, this shifts gears again. A 0 day, just to be clear, is a vulnerability that the vendor, Qualcomm in this case, didn't actually know about. And the crucial part is attackers were already actively using it, exploiting it in the wild before a patch was ready.
And Qualcomm apparently fixed 3 of these.
That's what the source says, yes. 3 distinct 0 days. Now, The slightly better news, according to the source, is that these seem to have been used in limited targeted attacks. So probably not widespread campaigns against everyone, but more focused, likely by more sophisticated groups. And importantly, Google's Android security team found and responsibly disclosed them to Qualcomm.
Okay, that's good. Did the sources give details on what these vulnerabilities were?
They give specifics for 2 of the 3. CVE 2025-21479 and CVE 2025-21280. And where were these flaws found? Interestingly, they were incorrect authorization issues right inside the graphics driver. Specifically, the Adreno GPU, that's the chip component that handles all the graphics processing on many Android phones.
The graphics chip? Wow. That's probably not the first place you'd think of looking for a major security hole.
It really shows how vulnerabilities can pop up in these fundamental, sort of unexpected hardware components. The sources rate these 2 flaws pretty highly on the severity scale, too, a CVSS score of 8.6.
Yeah, that's high. When you connect that back, it just underscores how deep the attack surface goes. It's not just the apps we install or the websites we visit. It's flaws in the basic hardware, the silicon itself being actively exploited. It forces a much deeper think about security, doesn't it? Beyond just software.
It absolutely broadens the scope of what security teams need to worry about and monitor, definitely.
And, these specific examples we've walked through, the pretty basic cryptojacking targeting setup errors, the vulnerabilities hiding in pre-installed phone apps, even these 0 days in core hardware, they all kind of feed into the bigger picture described in our other sources. We had that weekly recap and the piece on defense strategies.
Those sources paint a pretty stark picture of modern attacks. The recap used phrases like quiet, convincing, and fast. And it highlighted a huge problem for defenders, just struggling to trust their own systems, Because things might look normal, attackers are using legitimate tools, detection gets really hard, often delayed.
Yeah, the recap listed examples that show the sheer variety. APT intrusions, those are the state-sponsored groups, mentions of potential AI-driven malware, zero-click exploits where you don't even have to do anything, browser hijacks. It's just a massive, complex mix of threats out there.
And that connects directly to the other source, the one on defense strategies. It basically argues that this whole evolution in threats is forcing industries to completely rethink how they approach defense.
Rethink why, exactly, because the old ways just aren't working anymore.
Pretty much. According to that source, traditional defenses, the ones looking for known bad virus signatures or blocking specific malicious files, they're getting bypassed more and more. Attackers are using smarter techniques, things like encrypting their malicious traffic so it looks legitimate, using living off the land tactics.
Right, using tools already built into the system, like PowerShell or command prompt.
Exactly, using the system's own tools against it. And also lateral movement, moving carefully and quietly within a network once they get that first foothold.
So they're basically trying to blend in, use existing tools, move stealthily. Makes sense that traditional alarms might miss that.
It does. And what's really concerning, as the source points out, is that often these threats are doing damage before anyone even realizes they're there, sometimes for a long time. And then even when they are found, cleaning up can be incredibly slow and difficult because they're so embedded. Using native tools makes it hard to untangle. The source really emphasizes this urgent need for new strategies to handle these sophisticated, stealthy attacks. It even mentions some industries adopting a secret defense strategy, although unfortunately our sources don't really spell out what that actually entails.
That's interesting, though. It tells us the why. Why the old methods struggle against these modern threats, and that new approaches are being developed, even if the specifics are still under wraps, at least in the material we looked at. It really highlights the challenge, that constant race and defense.
Yeah, it underscores that constant cat-and-mouse game between attackers and defenders.
So, okay, let's try and pull this all together. This deep dive, looking through these different sources, has given us quite a layered view of what's happening in cybersecurity right now.
Absolutely. We've seen everything from, relatively simple attacks like cryptojacking, using common tools against basic setup mistakes, all the way to highly sophisticated groups finding and using unknown flaws 0 days in the very hardware of our mobile devices.
Right. And we've seen how these specifics fit into that broader trend. Attackers aiming to be quiet, fast, evasive, using techniques designed specifically to get around traditional security, which often means they aren't caught quickly, and cleaning up is tough.
And hopefully by unpacking all this from the sources, you now have a clearer insight into the kinds of threats targeting everything from big company infrastructure right down to the phone in your pocket.
So thinking about everything we've covered, the simple exploits, the supply chain risks and trusted software, the super stealthy advanced attacks, what's maybe the one big assumption about security that this deep dive makes you question the most?
Definitely something to think about as you go about your digital life.
And that wraps up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.